Hi everybody, I'm Sumana Harihareswara, and thank you very much for joining me for this talk at RailsConf, How to Get a Project Unstuck. When an open source project has gotten stuck, how do you get it unstuck, especially if you aren't already its maintainer? My teams have done this with several projects, and today I'll share a few case studies, principles, and gotchas, because more than developer time, coordination and leadership are a bottleneck in software sustainability. So I hope that you'll come away from this talk with steps that you can take in the short and long runs to address this for projects that you care about. Now, there are no slides for today's talk, but there is an outline already posted on my blog in case you want to refer to that. And I'll be posting links to that on Twitter and so on as RailsConf happens. And in case you need something visual to look along with. But otherwise, there's no slides. If you want to just put on some wireless headphones and go do something else while you listen, that is totally fine with me. Sometimes I think about Frodo from Lord of the Rings. This is not going to be the kind of talk where you have to know a lot about Lord of the Rings in order to watch it, but Frodo is reasonably well known for saying that he would take on a quest that he didn't know how to do. I will take the ring, though I do not know the way. And I always imagine him saying that kind of frustrated. Like, I'll take the ring, though I do not know the way. And I call this damn it driven leadership. Like, damn it, somebody's got to do it. And if you're watching this talk, this might be you. Because there is an open source project, and open source, it's supposed to be openness, right? Anybody can participate. But it seems like it's hard to get it unstuck, and you want to get it unstuck. You want to participate not just in improving the code or improving the documentation. You want to improve the project because maybe there's a team member that everybody else is having trouble with, or maybe you need to expedite a release, or maybe there's something else. And I do consulting specifically in this. So I want to help you take that, take that quest and take on the work that I think there's nearly no training in doing, which is not just starting or running an open source project and maintaining it as its founder, but coming in and being the turnaround lead, becoming and being the turnaround lead so that you can help projects that you care about. So let me start by telling you a few stories of times I got a project unstuck, and then I'll share with you some principles and some gotchas and some next steps. So one time I got a project unstuck really just by gathering information and helping people make the decisions they needed to make. I wasn't really the one who made most of those decisions. And this was a case of unifying the to-do list. So there's this feminist science fiction convention I really care about called WisCon. And as of 2011, I'd been going for a few years. I'd already been a project manager in proprietary software and a little bit in open source. And the volunteers who develop a web application to manage WisCon, the submissions for panels and things like that, they just had a jumble of bug reports and feature requests in Basecamp, Google Code, which is an old website that doesn't exist anymore, old emails, text notes, literal, either physical or virtual Post-its. And so over 3 to 4 months in 2011, I consolidated and organized those to-dos into a prioritized queue. I put all the code-related issues into Google Code, and then I kept the team on one page via Basecamp updates and a weekly conference call. So by the time that I stopped volunteering with that project, they were more set. They knew what everybody was supposed to be doing. They knew what the high priority tasks were, so they could move better, faster, less confused. So a couple of lessons. One is open all the drawers and look under the couch, is how I put it. Look for where people are stashing notes and to-dos and branches, and don't get distracted by should, right? If you ask people where should people be making notes about issues and backlog, well, maybe they all should be in this place. But if you ask where do you actually track these things, there's going to be some people who say, oh, I don't deal with the bug tracker. It's so crowded with things that don't matter. So I just keep a personal list over here. So take that personal list from them, or at least, copy it, right? That's gold. Also, when you have to consolidate platforms, instead of getting ideological, see if you can pick whatever the most people who are actually doing work right now want to use. Maybe you don't love Basecamp. Then again, maybe you do. This is RailsConf. And but if that's what the most people who are working on it want to use, if it has almost all the features you think are necessary, go ahead and consolidate there. This took a few hours a month over the course of multiple months. It wasn't that big a time commitment, but it really supercharged the team to move forward. Another time I did something kind of similar was I just filtered and cohered the priority list, really. There's a mailing list manager called Mailman, and it had its start in the 1990s and its 2.0 release in 2000, the 2.1 release in 2002, and then the first alpha of the 3.x branch in 2008. And then they just kept trying to get 3.0 out the door, and as of 2015, they've been trying to get 3.0 out the door for 7 years. And I, in late 2014, started contributing as an individual contributor. And then in 2015, I started helping out just around the edges with little bits of, well, in order for me to get my work done as an individual programmer, I really need for the developer instructions to be clear. So I cleaned that up. Well, in order for me to know what bugs to fix, all these old, obsolete, non-reproducible bugs in the bug tracker need to be cleaned out. So I cleaned those out. Well, in order to keep all this stuff straight, so I did a tremendous amount of cleanup work just because I needed to be a janitor to make a workspace that I felt comfortable working in. And then a bunch of us got together at a sprint at a conference a few months into 2015, and it turned out we all knew that we wanted to be there to get 3.0 out the door, but everybody there kind of had their head sort of on their own thing, and no one had talked about the big picture, so we weren't sure that we were actually going to get that done. So I grabbed a marker and a big Post-it note, and I wrote out blockers to 3.0. And then even just putting those down and talking about them let us say, oh, wait, no, that's not actually a blocker, or that's fixed. Or someone said, oh, that turns out that that gets fixed by this other thing. And so I was able to cross off several of those. And then over the course of that work week, I helped people keep going by helping one person with a little bit of a UI decision, just giving a first pass, writing a first draft of release notes so that someone else took over, getting testers from adjoining tables, people working on other projects so they could test stuff out, and then just making sure that everybody stayed unblocked and that that priority list stayed tight and valid. By the end of that week, we were one upstream dependency bug away from releasing 3.0, and basically a few weeks after that, we were out. So some lessons. Sometimes it looks like there are no explicit priorities and there's no roadmap. And if you see that, it might be because people have different opinions and there's a slow, quiet fight about it. But sometimes it's because no one's gone to the trouble of bringing up the question and checking and making it explicit. And once it's explicit, then people can make better and more specific plans about what to do first, what depends on what, and when users should expect new features. It's a real gift that if you can bring that. And second, first drafts are like springboards for your teammates. User experience decisions and release notes. It's, again, a way to supercharge your team. And third, you don't have to be a lead developer to pick up that marker. And in fact, it can be better if you're not. This is where I might say some slightly controversial things. Okay, so if at least one of the maintainers of a project is not particularly enthusiastic about programming, like I can program, but programming is not the primary thing I feel enthusiastic about in group software projects, that can be better. Because then, when I see so I'm in that position, right? Which is that I'm a programmer, but that's not the main thing that I feel enthusiastic about in order to empower people with software. And when I see a bug that needs fixing, I'm not tempted into doing it. I'm not, I'll just do that then. No, and that would draw me away from the project management work. Instead, I delegate it. I think about how to prioritize it. I think about who could do that work. And I think about what processes and relationships they might need to support them. And I think that people who mostly want to write software can lose focus on the big picture of project success, which is why it is helpful to have people with complementary interests running a project together. Another kind of unsticking that I've worked on for an open source project is gathering funding. Now, open source and money, this is a huge topic, right? And there's a lot of existing material in case you need help thinking about this, especially if there's going to be people who were volunteer, it was an all volunteer effort, and now people are being paid for the first time. So I might refer you to Benjamin Mako Hill's 2005 article, Problems and Strategies in Financing Voluntary Free Software Projects, which I'll be linking to in that outline. It's also useful to think about grants, because you can apply for free money sometimes to fund your open source effort. Now, I will not talk that much about grants right here and right now, because I actually gave a separate 15-minute talk at MozFest, the Mozilla Festival, very recently, and the video and slides and outline are all up from that. So I'm going to advise you to look at that. But I can talk a little bit about corporate funding. So the case study that I'm going to share here has to do with AutoConf, which I worked on recently. GNU AutoConf was pretty stuck, and I'll get to talking about how. It is a tool for producing configure scripts for building, installing, and packaging software on POSIX systems, such as Linux. And it's a core component of the GNU build system, also known as AutoTools. So in case you have ever had to install a software package on the command line by compiling it from source that's written in C, you might have been instructed to run /configure make install. So that configure script, in order for the packager to provide it to you, they generally use AutoConf as a way of creating that. GNU AutoConf was founded in 1991. Progress clipped along, developers working together, releases coming out. And then in 2012, they released 2.69. And there weren't any releases after that for quite some time. People kept committing to Git Master, but no releases. And then in January 2020, it had been almost 8 years since the last release, a friend of mine saw a kind of plaintive email on the AutoConf mailing list saying, is there someone I can pay to make a new release of this software? And the person who saw this and brought to my attention is my friend and colleague, Zach, who is a contributor to AutoConf. So we sent him an email and started talking about a first engagement with a discovery phase as the first thing. And Keith paid us for that. We then made a giant to-do list that we shared with him later in the year in June. So we could say, all right, here's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen in order to get AutoConf 2.70 out the door. And then we emailed contacts to look for some more money, because it wasn't all going to come from Keith. And we were able to get money from Keith, from Bloomberg, and from the GNU Toolchain Fund of the Free Software Foundation. And Zach and I worked on this, and AutoConf 2.70 came out last year. It was, if you can believe it, a good thing coming out of the year 2020 that a bunch of people thought, wow, we didn't know this was ever going to happen. So some lessons on what worked here. Look, if you need to get corporate funding to get a particular bit of your project unstuck because you need enough money to pay people to work in a concentrated fashion on something, then look for people who are already offering that money. Possibly there's people who have already been asking in your issue tracker, on Twitter, and in email, and see if you can work with existing credible contributors. The fact that Zach already had a track record within AutoConf was incredibly helpful. Some gotchas: this can be slow. Watch out for fixed price engagements, especially if you don't already have continuous integration in place, because fixing and finding regressions can be such a time suck. Zach said that preparation for the AutoConf 2.70 release took almost twice as long as he anticipated. He made 5 beta releases between July and December 2020, and he merged 157 patches, most of those bug fixes. So expediting a delayed release using corporate sponsor money, it can work, absolutely. Be careful and conservative about trying to budget how much time it will take so that you are getting compensated as you need to. And finally, in a case study that's a little bit more like the one that I shared earlier on with WisCon, sometimes just a little bit of nudging can be incredibly helpful. Nudging, prioritizing, and communicating. So I want to talk to you a little bit about PipEnv and how I was able to help them out with only about 15 hours of donated time over 3 months. I saw that this Python packaging related tool hadn't had a release between November 2018 and when people were talking about it in March 2020. And I noticed that there was someone saying, hey, we should remove this from a particular list of recommended tools because it hasn't had a release out in more than a year. And so I happened to know at this point one of the maintainers of PipEnv, and so I asked in Internet Relay Chat, which is what came before Slack, hey, did you see this? How are things going? What do you need? And he said, I need to stay on task. I know what needs to happen in order for me to get this next release out. I just need to concentrate, and I just keep getting distracted. And he said that what he needed in order to actually bear down and get this done was for someone to interrupt him and yell at him in chat frequently to say, are you working on the thing you should be? And I said, would that work? Would you listen to that person? And he said, at first I would argue back. And then I would say, no, actually you're right. And I would switch to doing the thing instead of yak shaving, right? Working on all these sort of side things that aren't actually important, aren't actually blockers to getting the next PipEnv out. So I started helping out over the next few days, weeks, months. Every once in a while I went into chat and I said, hey, are you doing what you should be doing? And if he said, I feel overwhelmed, I don't know where to start, I would say, well, how about here? And then even if he said, no, not there, then he had still been able to get over that first bump, right, and begin his work. I would draft things. I would say, hey, is this an issue that you need to work on? Or I posted updates to the GitHub tracking issue about how this release was going. And I helped him by drafting in a shared collaborative document an update that he could send to the mailing list, because he had a hard time starting those kinds of documents, that kind of like large prose thing, but he could edit and polish what I had written. Again, remember, a first draft is like a springboard that helps supercharge your teammate. So then he was able to make 2 beta releases and eventually put out that next release in May 2020. And the PipEnv team has been able to keep going, June 2020, August 2020, November 2020, and so on. So some lessons. You can do a lot with a little. This was in total about 15 hours of my time over the course of several months, which is not that much, but it was the catalyst to get him what he needed so that he could get that next release out. Fix bugs, fix continuous integration issues, and upgrade all sorts of dependencies and so on. But the second lesson there is that this was possible because I honestly complimented what was missing. And that requires trust. You can only do that if you have a good relationship with your team, right? Because he was able to be vulnerable with me and say, this is what I need. I keep getting distracted. This is the help I could use. If there's no trust, people have their guard up. They can't ask for what they need, and they can't accept help when it's offered. This is where the relationships come in. Relationships can help you help them by allowing them. I'm going to stop using the word help now. So let's talk a little bit about some principles, the premises that are my working assumptions as I look at open source projects and think about what it takes to get them unstuck, to expedite a release, to fix a social or a digital workflow problem or what have you. One is that there is no one tech industry and there is no one open source community, right? There's a lot of different sub bits of people working as technologists There are grad students who just want to make something to help them with their research, and they're going to put it aside once they defend their dissertation. There are people in industry who are collaborating with 8 different companies in some kind of consortium on a thing that runs in the cloud, and that practically only exists as a really complicated API, so no humans are meant to interact with it as a user interface. There are people who work on mobile apps, there are people who, et cetera, et cetera. And these different people have different motivations, different needs, different abilities. Similarly, there's no one open source community. And if you try to say, well, I spread the word to the open source community about what is necessary, you're probably not going to have the best time. You need to think a little bit more specifically about who needs, wants, or can work on the thing that you care about, and about how to appeal to those sets of people. Another premise that I have is that open source contributors as a population disproportionately want to code. And you may say, that's kind of a weird thing to say, Sumana. That sounds really obvious. But is it? Because when we think about the software industry, we think, well, it has a tremendous number of professions in it, right? There are marketers, and there are salespeople, and there are testers, and there are system administrators, and there are designers, and there are managers, and there are writers, and so on and so on, and there are developers of a variety of stripes. If you were to just pluck a random person who works in the technology industry versus a random person who is a person who contributes to open source software, and think about what is the likelihood that the thing they want to be doing is programming, well, that propensity is higher in open source than a randomly chosen person from, let us say, the tech industry, or who works in a tech industry. And what this means is there's a tremendous number of skills that we are undersupplied in among people who are already contributing to open source. So it would be helpful to us to learn those skills if you're already a contributor to open source, or for us to be able to appeal to and hire or bring in as volunteers or through internships or what have you, people who have those skills that we need, including management, design, writing, customer support, and so on. Another premise I have is that skills are fungible, domain knowledge can be learned, and credibility can be earned. And what do I mean by that? We act, I think, too often in open source like, well, that's the person who knows how that system works. Well, that system exists now and did not exist at some point, and this person had to learn how it works, or maybe they made it. Someone else can learn. Now, you might say no one is going to volunteer for that. Well, that's one reason money is useful. Or maybe you just haven't found the right way to appeal to volunteers or to help onboard them in a way that they find rewarding to learn more about whatever that system is. Domain knowledge can be learned. Skills are fungible, and if you've never learned how to write a budget, you can learn that. If you've never learned how to diplomatically close an issue so that the user on the other end feels okay about it, you can learn that. These are all skills. If you think that you're not an X person, it's worth giving yourself 10 minutes to actually try. And credibility can be earned. I came into pipenv, AutoConf, WisCon, Mailman, right? I'm not the founder of any of those projects. I was able to earn credibility, and the sequence of steps that I suggest later in this talk helps you understand how. And every open source project has a life cycle. And yes, I'm talking about endings here. A project succeeds in different ways, right? Because different people have different goals when they start and contribute to and run open source software projects. But at some point, it probably becomes unlikely that it is going to succeed by whatever the measures are of the people who are involved at that time and who are actually willing to put energy into it. And at that point, it is better to have a graceful ending than a long, lingering limbo. So that is my point of view. I'm willing to hear differently if you would like to share with me your reason why you think that's not the case. But that's something that's worth thinking about when you're wondering, how do I get this project unstuck? Might be good to assess it and double check. Maybe the best answer is for this project to end and users to merge with a different set of people who are using a different product. Something to think about. Because there are some stucknesses that actually speak to a strategic issue of why does this project exist. And that takes me to the 5 major areas, in my opinion, where legacy projects get stuck. And I call these strategy, team, interface, workflow, and money. And as I talk about these, maybe you'll think about how those apply to the examples that I've given earlier of Mailman and the WisCon application, AutoConf, and pipenv. One is strategic. Strategy stuff is, well, what is our goal? Why does this thing exist? What tool? How does it superpower users, this tool? What is our goal, and should this project exist, or should we decommission it? Has the team agreed on those things? Given that, what work do we need to prioritize, and how urgent is it? Team is what I call the questions and issues of the people who are working together to make the project. Do we have enough maintainers to do the essential work? Do we have up-and-coming contributors who can replace us as maintainers in the future? Does everyone know who has what powers, or are some people confused about who has the power to do certain things? Maybe you've run into that confusion, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary slownesses and people dropping balls, right? Because they don't realize who's responsible for what. Do we run into team workflow problems when different groups want to participate at different speeds? Maybe you've seen that. Is there a malicious or off-putting or flaky person who needs handling? Do we have the social processes we need to support the project and each other, like meetings and mentorship programs and requests for comment if necessary? Then there's an area that I would call interface, which is about the interface socially, informationally between the team that works on the project and everybody else, right? Upstreams, downstreams, users, dependencies, environments, and so on. So these are questions like, who are our users and what do they need? Are we listening to them? Are we responding quickly enough to their concerns? Do they have a way of listening to us? An announcement mailing list, Twitter, something. Who are our partners and upstreams, and do we talk to each other? And do new contributors who want to become members of the team fall through the cracks? The 4th area is workflow and digital infrastructure. I'm not talking about the code base itself, right? I'm talking about all of the machinery that helps people improve and use the code base. So do we run automated tests on every patch? AutoConf did not have that, right? And it made it real hard to put out a new release. Do new issues, patches, and discussions get interlinked so developers and users can easily follow up? This was something that WisCon didn't have, for instance. Are there bottlenecks or duplications in the platforms we use to respond to issues and review code and discuss the project in general? This is the stuff where writing new code, not for the project, but for the infrastructure around the project, can really supercharge your team. And finally, financial resources, right? Do we have enough money to do what we want to do? Have we developed plans or proposals to turn money into progress, and can we persuade funders to give us money? So those are, to my eye, 5 major areas where legacy projects get stuck: strategy, team, interface, workflow, and money. So think for a second about any projects that you care about, maybe where you might think they might be getting stuck. And of course, there are combinations. It is Amusing, but also dire to imagine a project that would be stuck in all 5 manners. And if you can imagine that scenario, please write me a hilarious, I hope fictional story. So, how can you set yourself up for success if you are a contributor who cares about a project and would like to help it get unstuck? Here is the sequence that I have followed and that I think you should too, whether you're a volunteer or getting paid, in order to gain the credibility you need so you can make the transformations that the project needs. First, settling in. This is doing routine tasks that do not require much trust to assess and earn credibility. And I'll go into more detail on each of these steps. Second is taking charge, which is doing things that require trust, but that the group has already agreed needs to happen. Then there's making change, which is modifying and adding social, digital, financial, legal infrastructure. And then finally, there's passing the baton, which is passing leadership over to successors and leaving. So let me go into each of these in a little bit more detail. When you're settling in, some of the tasks that you might do that don't really require much trust and that will help you assess the project and earn credibility with the existing contributors and maintainers. Take an initial project audit or inventory and take on some routine responsibilities. Start helping do those classic things of responding to existing questions in the bug tracker and in other fora and help improve the end user and developer documentation. Learn the people. Informally converse with any people who might have brought you in and understand the conversation platforms and expectations so that you can build trust by communicating appropriately on those. Map the project's position and velocity. Place the project in context. I would actually advise that you consider doing a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis, which is a classic business school kind of approach. Next, taking charge. So here's where you're doing things once you have a little bit more trust that you've earned from the previous step. This is where you do release and communication and issue management, such as setting priorities to make releases and expedite those, replying to issues that require diplomacy and running meetings. This is where you're dealing with any existing budgets and just getting your head around them, possibly understanding what the income and outgo are. And this is where you help with noticing and dealing with people issues among your existing team, such as growing and promoting promising contributors, working with people of a lot of different backgrounds and approaches, and helping colleagues who maybe have a little bit of a harder time being as reliable and consistent as you might like, coaching and excluding malicious or negligent people, understanding and dealing with people who are perhaps interacting with the project in a way that is not appropriate and breaks your code of conduct, and managing these rhythm mismatches, cadence shear in participation, where, for instance, one contributor or one set of contributors would like to re-architect the whole thing or get a lot of new features merged a lot faster than everybody else can review them. And this is also a step, this step of doing things that people already have consensus need to happen. This is where you guide new contributors who need that guidance, like teaching and including unskilled volunteers who are giving you poor patches. If you can help reduce the load on everybody else by helping those unskilled contributors and dealing with that particular flow of patches and pull requests, you're helping improve capacity for everyone else. Now, making change. Once you have established yourself as someone who can do the things that there's already consensus for, this is where you gather consensus and you use it to modify and add infrastructure that empowers everyone, whether it's social, digital, financial, or legal. So you might use here social infrastructure to address team and interface issues. These would be things like using and improving mentorship programs like Outreachy and Google Summer of Code, using in-person time well at, once we can do that again, at sprints and conferences. Helping your team with responsibility audits and inventories, talking with them about, all right, what all is on your plate? Let's make a big list and see what we should be removing. Adding and improving codes of conduct if you don't have any, right? You do not get to do that until you've been through the first few phases, because a new person coming into a project and saying, let's add a code of conduct as their first contribution, they're not going to get that much trust. Governance and related changes, those all are things that you can do at this stage. Developing a request for comment process so that big architectural changes, big policy changes can go through an appropriate level of review. And improving user and stakeholder communication and listening channels, and adding user experience and product management activities. These are all things that you can do once you have more trust, and they'll help supercharge the project. And along the way, you can use those to feed into changes that influence people to get strategy unstuck as well, right? Once you have better communication inside the team and with interfacing with people outside it, including product management activities and user testing, you'll learn a lot more about what is this product for, and what are our goals, and are we on our way to it? What should we prioritize? Also in this phase is where you can improve digital infrastructure to increase work capacity, efficiency, and developer happiness. So you can gather and unify platforms. You can improve bug tracking and other user support interfaces. You can improve code review and related processes. And you can really help people move faster by automating workflow and some documentation with continuous integration and bots. Financial infrastructure is also something that I advise you think seriously about. Again, even if you're used to an all-volunteer project where no one has received money before for working, it's worth just thinking, learning about how to write budgets, how to think about what money could do for the project, and consider it. And then if it turns out that might be a good step for you, then you can learn about writing grant and other funding proposals, and consider crowdfunding and drip funding as well, options like TideLift. And legal infrastructure is also something that you can make more of a push on and get more consensus on once you have earned credibility in the project. So this is maybe getting an organizational home in case you don't have a legal entity as an umbrella, and dealing with any questions about licenses and trademarks. Finally, passing the baton. This is where you pass leadership over to successors and leaving. So think about sustainability, which you've been improving the whole go, right? Because a project that has good infrastructure for social stuff, digital stuff, financial, legal stuff is more sustainable. But once you know that you're okay with leaving, then finding your successors, saying no, realizing when to, and responsibly stepping away is something that you can do much more happily once you've actually helped level up this project that you care about, so that you know it will continue to empower users and provide that value even after you're done. And it feels real nice after you step away from a project to hear an announcement or to keep using it and to see it keep improving, and to know, hey, I planted a seed there. I wasn't the person who started that, but I helped it along the way. And now I get to continue using it and look at it fondly, even though I'm not working on it anymore. You kind of have to do it in this sequence, in my experience, because, well, think about how it could go wrong if you were handing the keys over for something you care about to somebody else, right? By showing up and doing the kind of ordinary contributor work first, and then helping out with maintenance tasks, boring tasks, difficult tasks, and taking those off of other people, you enable them to do what probably most of your colleagues want to be doing, which is writing features and bug fixes and maybe doing a little bit of code review. Right? If you enable other people to do that, then they'll be real grateful that you are taking those burdens that weren't being done off of their shoulders. It's also really helpful if you can be honest with yourself about what opinions you have, what opinions you share as conversations and arguments and discussions come up. Keep to your core values, of course. If something is a matter of principle, talk about it, be open about it. But on other issues of engineering questions like architecture, code style, what platform to use, it's really useful if your mindset is, your main opinion is, well, the fact that we haven't made a decision about this yet is blocking us, so I want to facilitate us getting this resolved. When I come into a project, generally that's what I care about, right? I care about the large-scale strategy and making sure that, we're all on the same page about what we're trying to get done here. And I want the people who are going to actually be implementing the work to have a way to get resolved so they can get unblocked and move forward. But power, certainly, continuing power is not my goal. And if you can demonstrate to your colleagues that you're not a power grabber, that you want to get the project going because you want to get the project going, that's really helpful. These tools and practices, I hope, will help you not just lead developers and founders, but anybody who cares about an open source software project so that anyone can be Frodo. I, as you may have guessed, care about this a lot, so I'm working on a book. And if you go to changeset.nyc, which is my business website, then you can download a short excerpt, a few chapters of the upcoming book for free. And I'd love to get your feedback on this talk, on the book, the book excerpt, because we all need to share ideas, experiences, and thoughts, because we're now in not even the second, probably not even the third, maybe the fourth generation, right, of free and open source software. And we're seeing this hole where the leadership pipeline ought to be, of people graduating into being lieutenants and maintainers of important, critical open source software projects, big and large, written in lots of languages and lots of frameworks. Once you have these skills, you can apply them to lots of different projects in lots of different places. And I want to empower anybody who works and contributes in free and open source software so that you can do that, so that we can make our entire industry, our entire ecology more sustainable. So please take a look at what I've said here and what I've written in this book. Let me know your experiences. If you've had a completely different set of experiences about what it took to get a project unstuck, maybe in an industry that I haven't participated in, I want to know so that we can all get better at this together. I'm at changeset.nyc. My name is Sumana Harihareswara, and my social media accounts are at BrainWayne, BrainWane. So please contact me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have a pleasant day, evening, or other part of your 24-hour cycle.